I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and I'm so thrilled today to be talking all about the new TV series Peacemaker with actor Chukwudi Iwuji. And I wanted to start by talking about the way in which, for you, it always seems like it's really important to you to come to set and to come to new roles with really strong ideas of who the character is, but also with a lot of malleability, because so much of it is seeing what other actors are doing once you're on set together or in a rehearsal room. So much of it is what's the director's vision, in this instance, working with James Gunn on the series. And so with this character in particular, what were some of the initial concepts and details that were really important to you, but the spaces where you wanted to keep that openness and that flexibility for yourself?
What an awesome question. And also, how did you know my process? That's really hilarious. Like, I'm very much a believer in, I don't have a process. I know it's always exciting to hear about spending time in the Bronx Zoo studying salamanders in their movement, or, selling your property and living on the street for a while to get into character. None of that appeals to me. I really believe in, I drill the lines. I learned the lines so well that I could wash dishes or drink my coffee in a noisy coffee shop and still have the lines running in my head. That's, if there is a process in my process, that's the process, is learning the lines. The rest is imagination and what happens at night. Sometimes you wake up with great ideas because you've been processing it overnight. Sometimes I'm walking down the street and I suddenly get an idea, or I see someone that has that. I leave myself open to that. But as far as what I turn up to work with is knowing those lines. Of course, you have an idea of how you might want the scene to go, but there is a wonderful X factor that is the other actors. There's an X factor of walking onto the set, brilliant set. There's the X factor of James suddenly deciding you've given him an idea by a take you've done, and he wants more of that. But I'm always excited coming onto set, feeling the security of knowing, well, I know this character, but I don't know where this scene is going. And that can only be informed by the other person and the immediacy of the moment. If I come in already full to the brim with the performance, there's no room to be filled in by the other factors, So that's how that's how I approach, whether it's Hamlet or it's Mern. It's the same thing.
And with the character of Mern, watching him, he's a character who comes in with a lot of sternness and there's a lot of seriousness to him as a character. But it also becomes very clear that it comes from a place of passion and care. And to him, it's all about, really wanting to do a good job and wanting his team to do a good job and holding everybody to a very high standard. And how was that a really important facet and a key part to shaping a lot of his personality traits for you when you read the scripts?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny with Mern. The first introduction to him for me was only 3 pages sent to me from my agent to do a self-tape on. And I initially didn't want to do it because I was like, well, I'm never going to, they're going to give this to Lance Henrik or someone. Do you know what I mean? Why don't they just stop wasting my time and go hire The Rock? Because of the breakdowns. You read the breakdowns, you know what I mean? But the writing for me gave away so much about the character for me. It triggered certain things to me about him. And a big part of acting for me is the rhythm of how they speak, at least how I think they speak. As soon as I hear how I want to say these lines, I sort of work in a weird way from outside in, and it makes sense. So I was like, oh, but the rhythm of this. And then I read the sides and they were hilarious. And then I gave them to my wife. I said, read this. And she thought it was hilarious. I said, let's tape it. I'm never going to get it, but let's just tape it because as an actor, I owe it to myself to have fun with this, And we did it in one take because it was so funny. And we sent it off. And I didn't think I'd hear anything about it. And then a couple of days later, I hear that James Gunn friggin' loved it. And, then the offer came. So it's for me, it was very interesting that I heard how Mern should speak. I immediately knew this guy was dry. I immediately knew his delivery was very matter of fact. And then I find out that his character is supposed to have a black op past. He's a killer soldier. He's all that. I go, oh, of course, that makes sense. These guys are efficient. If you see these guys, they're usually the very well-dressed bodyguards of high-end people who look like they should be going to a board meeting or Tom Ford convention, but they move with such efficiency. Do you know what I mean? And they don't waste anything. So that was the idea I had for Men. He doesn't waste anything. He doesn't move too much. When he raises his voice, it's for complete impact. His eyes tell so much, because you're never gonna know how much he's thinking. You're only gonna know a fraction of what Mern is thinking. So I find that really so those are the clues that were there for me. And then of course, as you know, the arc of the character, it makes sense that if he is stern, if he is very rigorous, if he is very driven, it's because he cares so much. And knowing that he cares so much is what was my sort of secret weapon, the little thing I had in there, which gave me license to do everything, including asking people to do horrific things, is because this is really important, So when you have that secret and you can sit with it, playing the taciturn and the drill sergeant and all that stuff is actually pretty easy, because although this is harsh and hard to you, I know why I'm doing it,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think it's so interesting that you're talking about the detailing in the scripts that gave you the delivery and the pacing and the rhythm, because I feel like you talk the same way about Shakespeare language and the way that the language in a Shakespeare play gives you the stage direction and tells you the speed and the pacing of that delivery. And is that something that no matter what the character is or no matter what the project is, you find yourself really keying into the details of language to find those cues?
Absolutely. Were you an actor yourself? I mean, you speak very knowledgeably about the process. It's
I
great.
just study it all and love it.
I mean, I certainly look for that, and it's not always there, because not everyone writes as well as James Gunn, and certainly no one has written as well as Shakespeare. But that's whether it's there or not, that's the first thing I look for. A lot of people have different processes, but my process, because of my background in Shakespeare and classical work, is always to let the language lead you, what they're saying lead you, and always assume that you're being directed by how they say things, when there's an ellipsis or when there's a dash, or how quickly. Like, it becomes very clear to me if this person has to speak quickly or speak slowly. So those are all, I look for the clues in the language. Now, that only works if it's been written well. I mean, and I guess I've been pretty fortunate that I've worked with, between classical work and directors like James when I've done film and stuff, or Barry Jenkins in Underground Railroad, or Ava. These are people who make sure the script is there for the actors. Make sure they write well, they adapt well, they tweak well, so that I can get my clues from the language, because that's always where I like to start. I hope I'm never in a position where where I'm like, oh God, this is a Hail Mary. I haven't been so far, so I hope that's never the case. But it was very clear to me. For me, that's my whole training and my whole career has been about taking clues from the dialogue and from the language.
I really love that. And you were talking a little bit before about the deadpan delivery and the comedic sensibility of him as a character. And what's so great about the ensemble scenes, and there's so many of them, is that everybody comes at it with their own character's comedic voice. And you really kind of get to be the person that almost slows down the pacing, lets everybody sit there in the uncomfortable silence. And so once you had that real idea of that dry delivery and that kind of holding everything back a little bit comedically, what was it like when you then went into shooting these ensemble scenes and everybody's kind of firing with their different rhythms and really figuring out how that tessellated together with everyone?
I sort of think it was a bit like, I think that's when art meets life, is like the delivery of, John Cena's delivery is very different from Jennifer Holland's, very different from Danielle's, but they're all coming at each other. And literally all I had to do was, I know I hate to reduce it to such basic descriptions, but wait for my cue and listen to them until it was my turn to speak. And then it's so funny and it's so back and forth, but thinking of it in terms of Mern, what is funny to you is deeply irritating to me. So that meant that buildup of laughter for you was a buildup of a storm for me. So when I would come in, by how good the rest of them were, And my job was, I had in most of those ensemble scenes, if you were going to break it down to motivation, my one motivation is to bring it back to focus with these guys, And then I had to play the taskmaster, of course, but I always found it was a delight to watch them do that. And it was a delight to to bounce off that and bring it back, and I think that's one of it's like a family. They're a dysfunctional family,
Yeah.
which was what was great about that. Ultimately, they were a very dysfunctional family.
And like you said, he's the person that has to bring everything back to focus. And did you also find that there was a necessity to have, a requirement of a little bit of cynicism in him as a character? Because in being the person in charge of all these operations, he's the person who has to think about every possible worst case scenario in order to try and figure out tactical advantage and how they can approach different things. And so was that a necessary component for his personality for you?
Yes, I mean, talking about it in a sort of actor's point of view, I couldn't get involved in a lot of fun, the ad-libbing and the whatever that they were doing it. And transferring that to a character's point of view meant I had to keep the mission going forward. Does that make sense? So the same frustrations of Chuck, the actor that wanted to riff and all that, are the same frustrations of Mern that has to like just bring them together. Do you see what I'm saying about art and life coming together nicely? But yes, I mean, a lot of it is that's one of the things I like about the Mern character that feeds into what you are asking is how little detail we do know of his past. And don't forget, this is a character James created, so there isn't a DC history to it. We just know every time someone mentions his name, people get uncomfortable, including Peacemaker. We know he has a dark past. We know he's done horrible things. So I know I come into the room with authority. And I know in my delivery that I have no qualms to kill you because I have done that my whole career very well. And I know Amanda Waller has hired me for that reason. So when you put all those things together, it sort of makes sense of the sort of guy he is. He's not there to make friends, whether he wants them or not. And he knows that each one of those people are expendable. Sadly, he doesn't want to lose them, but they're expendable. And when you allow the audience to imagine, and I love the fact we didn't map out what he'd done specifically, but left an open canvas for people to project onto it. When you map out what he could have done, it's pretty scary when Mern turns his eyes on you, because you ultimately don't matter because the world has to be saved, Yeah.
I also always think there's something so interesting about playing a character who in is really holding so much inside themselves and intentionally not revealing themselves and trying to keep that little bit of distance, because that in of itself is its own form of expression.
Yeah.
And so what was the interesting aspect in trying to figure out his expression for a character who is kind of
Holds
trying
so
not
much
to?
in.
Yeah.
I've always felt that those are the hands down sexiest sort of characters to play, not as in sexy, but just sexiest as in so great to play. As in, I mean, to be damaged, and yet to be elusive is so attractive to watch. You know what I mean? So and to play. So yes, holding the emotions in are always a lot of fun to do, because acting, I feel great acting, the journey towards great acting is in fact taking a journey. A lot of people think they want to come and play this. We know the arc of the story. We know what happens. So we want to come and play it. We want to come and show it. Actually, what's very exciting and sexy is watching us get to the point when we show it. And a character like this that keeps so much inside, all you have, especially when that camera comes to a close-up, is him thinking, but not saying, not impulsively acting on it. And thinking is a beautiful thing to watch on screen. And it's a really difficult thing for an actor to trust themselves that that's enough to do, So I love Mern because there's so much internal life. And internal life is just external life flipped inside out. So rather than acting on it, I'm thinking on it. Figure stuff out. And those pauses, those synapses in figuring stuff out, is just very interesting to watch. And as an actor, that gift of being allowed to have such a rigorous internal life and yet be interesting enough for people to watch you or to follow you, in this case as a leader, is a real gift. It's you don't get many roles like that, to be being asked to be both electric in energy, but also to keep it all so much to yourself. That's a real gift when you get that.
And you're bringing up there like the pauses within the dialogue, and it's also interesting because that's, like you were saying before, that's his physicality as a character as well, is this real stillness. And you were talking about how much is in his eyes, but there's so many moments again where, the conveyance is him doing nothing and being motionless and holding his body very still. What was kind of the instance in working with the scripts where you really found that physical stillness within him as a character?
There were wonderful moments in the script as the series, as you see, where certainly when he's alone in his apartment, that's a moment. There's a lot of stuff when he's looking at people. There's certain people that you look at when they look at you, you feel like I should fill the gap and talk. That's what I said. I remember saying that to James. I think he's one of those guys that when he turns his eyes on you, he's not uncomfortable with silence. So most people are uncomfortable with silence. So they feel they need to talk. And it's both what he would have used in getting information out of informants or in interrogations. It's certainly my dad had that also. When my dad was angry growing up, he would look at you for a long time. Just look, and you're wondering whether he's going to erupt, delay it till later, or deal with it now. You didn't know. And I love that about men. You just don't know. You don't. And then when the reveals happen as the show goes on, you go, oh my God, you had no idea. Peacemaker, you had no idea how much trouble you were in. Do you know what I mean? It's like little things like that he is this. Again, it comes back to that secret. I know I know that past, which we haven't explained explicitly, but I know it's there. So I don't need to do much more than stand here and look at you. And so the moments where I do more than when I do explode or do get angry or they count, they really count. There's something about stillness that I remember making a note to myself 10 years ago that part of my journey as an actor, as an artist, is to find the power in stillness. To find the power in your back, when your back is turned, how expressive your back can be if you're living through what's going on. And I'm not talking about heavy breathing to show you, none of that, but just like if you're thinking it and your back responds, how expressive a back can be, just as expressive as the front of a face. So it's acting. My journey is to learn and to improve at acting with every part of my body, as it were. That's where the surprises come, and I think stillness is a big part of that, because atoms. Nothing is still; they're always moving. Atoms, neutrons, they're bouncing. On the outside, they're contained and still, but there's always movement. And I think that's great acting. That's what you aim for when you that's always happening, but it seems from a still place, Does that make sense?
It does, and I think that's such a wonderful thing to have wanted to attain for yourself as an actor, and to have had something like that in a note, because it's an internal thing that's achievable within yourself, as opposed to an external goal of, oh, I want this type of role or this type of accolade, which you have no control over. Do you remember any of the other things that were in that note, or any of the other details and things that you really wanted to attain within yourself?
When those years when stillness was stillness. The power of stillness was one of them. The power of thought was another one, like what my character is thinking, internal life was another one. You'd be surprised how often you have to, as a performer, really tell yourself to really look at the person. We see them, we look in their direction, we look at them, but we don't often see them. And the relaxation that can come, especially if you're someone who's often racked with nerves, this is especially in live theater, the relaxation that can come when you come on stage and all those nerves dissipate because you're putting all your energy on the other person and seeing them. And one of the biggest mistakes we make as performers is we focus so much on our emotional life, on stage, when your only responsibility is the emotional life of the other person. In life, when we go through life, you come in for an argument with your partner and you're about needling them. You're about getting a rise out of them. If you want sympathy for someone, you say, please understand me. It's to them. You're not thinking about how sad am I. You're not thinking of how angry am I right now. It's all about them. You son of a, you know, it's, so I've never, it, transferring that to acting means take my focus away from myself. And it's all about making Peacemaker know I'm about to kill him, making Economist know he's an idiot. It doesn't matter. It will surprise me how I feel and react physically and whatever to it. The important thing, what I can control, is how I do it to them. And that's all my responsibility is. And they'll be doing, if they're doing the same to me, they'll get the reaction out of me. So another part of what I told myself then was like, leave your emotional life alone and focus everything, right down to actually looking at them, and not just at them, but seeing them, was a big part of that journey also.
Yeah. And the stillness from before as well also kind of makes me think about the way that you talk about figuring out what the camera needs from you and really distilling down what are the actions and the movements, not even necessarily that I need to give as my character, but also in terms of what the camera needs from me when you're doing television and film performances on screen. And so for Peacemaker, how did you navigate really finding what the camera needed from you in your performance?
You know, it's trial and error. You get some cues from the director, but you know, I'm still, film and TV is still relatively new in my entire journey as an actor. You know, still predominantly theater, so I'm still wrapping my head around this beautiful partner that is the camera. But it's becoming clearer to me about what that close up means and when you know it's there. There was a moment on set. Peacemaker has to do this, I think it's episode 3. This horrific act I want him to do the sound in John's earpiece, Mern giving him instructions to shoot someone, and John is having a crisis doing it, you know, and he was doing a great job, but the camera was getting closer and it was time for the really tight shot. And what he had been doing for the medium, you know, the wider lenses, he was doing in the tight. And then James just said, John, don't do anything. Don't move. I just want you to think about what Mern is asking you to do. And John breathed and it was the same scene, same shot, same requirement. But just thinking about it, the camera caught everything and your heart broke for him. And I was like, oh yeah, I've heard all this stuff about the close-ups, you know, the Ryan Gosling close-ups and all that stuff. But to see it in action was a real, watching on the monitor and just seeing how that was enough. And that was even more than enough. That was what it needed. So yes, I'm learning what cameras need at different times. And also, it's also down to like your costume. What are you wearing? I mean, in Guardians 3, I mean, Jesus, the first shot we shot was, I mean, I'm not going to give anything away, but me walking, for me, my first day of walking, I was like, this requires a certain kind of movement, you know? And that's very different from when the camera was up here, you know? So yes, it's all about navigation. It's like, you've got to learn the technical side of it, and you've got to learn how can I be my most natural, but you can't ignore the technical side. I can't just say, oh, I'm just going to do my thing when the camera is right here. You know, it just wouldn't take it. I remember taking a class with Bob Krakauer in New York, you know, which was a real watershed in my camera acting, because the class started with him showing you that film isn't continuous. It's 23 shots a second or whatever, 23 or 24. So there's a series of pictures, and camera acting, film acting is a series of pictures. And that's why when you talk, and I remember a year or two later, after seeing that, I saw an old interview with Jimmy Stewart. And he was talking about how when he was filming something later on in his career, it was in Argentina or something, and some guy, you know, came up to him and said, Mr. Stewart, I love you, whatever, I saw you in this film. And the guy described the scene, the pictures. He couldn't remember one word that was said, or even the name of the film, but he remembered the pictures. And I sent that to Bob, actually, that interview. And now I think he uses it in his class, because it's all about pictures. It's all about knowing if your director suddenly says, if Jay suddenly said, Chuck, just turn to me slowly, I'll do it. And I don't need to know why or whatever, because sometimes the shot that makes a difference. You know what I mean? And embracing that. And then you start internalizing that as an actor. So, what will it mean if I'm reading this letter with my wife saying she's left me? What does it mean if, while reading that and the camera is close, I just look up? What's the difference between doing that and looking to the side? It's just, and then seeing the picture in your head and deciding which one hits you the most. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
I really, really love all of that and appreciate you sharing all of this in so much detail. Thank you so much for such a wonderful conversation and talking all about Peacemaker.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.